Thank you, Katie. And thank you guys all for coming. Thanks also for coming back from the break. I know it's a long morning and lunch is coming up soon. We're really excited to talk about this today. So I talk to audiences all the time, clients just like you guys, about the importance, the critical importance of building a great mobile experience and how to begin doing it. And for much of this year, I've begun some of these talks with a little bit of a thought experiment. I asked people to think of their favorite restaurant. Now, some of you have heard me do this before, but I think it's only a small few of you. Most of you haven't. So take a moment. Think of your favorite restaurant. Okay, so now imagine if every time you walked into this favorite restaurant, the person who greeted you was an absolute jerk. I mean, not only did they not get you a table, they were like mean to you. They said they didn't like your shirt, your haircut. I know it's kind of a ridiculous conceit, but play along. Imagine it. How does it make you feel? So I think we do the same thing every time we deliver a bad landing page experience to our customers. Whether it's slow, whether the user can't find what they want, we're doing this to them. And developers, designers, product owners, we're sort of doing it all the time. So now, if we go back to this favorite restaurant of yours, and maybe it's not so favorite anymore, some of you would stay, right? I mean, you love the place, they make your favorite dessert, so you'd stay. But some of you guys would go, right? I mean, I know I'd have to really, really love that dessert to sit and listen to someone critique my haircut. I mean, seriously. Similarly, some of your customers would stay no matter the experience they receive when they land on your product pages. They love your product, you make the best t-shirts ever, or maybe they're just patient and they're gonna stay no matter what. But just like that restaurant, not everyone would or does stay. The data says that many users are gonna leave if the page loads too slowly, if they can't find what they want. And we know, and Jane told us this at the very beginning, users are getting more and more demanding. They want more assistive, faster, more personalized experiences all the time. Increasingly, it's actually becoming that not only will they not convert if they're faced with a bad landing page experience, it's gonna affect your users' perception of your brand. They're gonna go tell a friend about it, and they may never come back. It's kind of scary, right? On a much lighter note, who here has been to Disney World or Disneyland? I went about 5 years ago with my daughter, and we loved it. I mean, I loved it almost as much as I did as a kid, but sort of in a very different way. Almost a decade ago, before I went, Disney executives realized they had a problem. The happiest place on earth was still making plenty of people smile, and they were making plenty of money, but a key metric, guests' intent to return, was falling precipitously. And if you think back to the time when you went as a kid or as an adult, you probably remember some characters like you see on the slide, or a great show or something, or even a fun ride. But you also probably remember waiting, long lines, to get into the park, to get on Space Mountain. You were enduring a bad user experience. Now, it may not have ruined it for you, but it was affecting enough customers that first-time visitors were signaling at a rate of 50% that they were not planning to return. It's a stat that was reported by Austin Carr in the magazine Fast Company. So Disney put together a committee of really smart people to do something about this. And I commend this article in Fast Company to you because the ideas were amazing. Complete modernization of the Disney experience, making it more efficient, technologically savvy, more personalized, best in class. Some of those ideas, a few of them, are live and in production right now, as we might say, but most of them aren't. What happened? Well, as Carr tells it, and I love this quote, that the full-blown future, as it so often does, failed to arrive. Why? The reason it wasn't for lack of ideas, it wasn't for lack of budget, it wasn't even a lack of talent. The reason the project fell so far short of its ambitions was that the organization wasn't designed to deliver an experience that stretched across so many silos. And I'm here to tell you, based on a lot of meetings I've done over the last few years with dozens and dozens of clients and customers just like you guys, Disney is in no way alone. My conclusion is this: as we all work to improve the performance of our sites and apps, the reason we're here today, develop amazing user experiences across our entire portfolio, I believe the single biggest impediment is organizational design and culture. Let me put that another way. If you want to delight your customers, if you want a fast and performant mobile site, even if you want to be good at data and measurement, which we know is important, the single most important ingredient is to evolve the way you organize yourself around these goals. Don't just take my word for it, though. I mean, you should, but you don't have to. Harvard professors have written about this. Industry leaders from multiple lines of business have commented on it, and companies like McKinsey and Deloitte have studied it, and studied it pretty hard. In their study on design-focused companies, McKinsey went so far as to say that those that organize themselves in ways that produce and sustain great user experiences enjoy 32% higher revenue growth in their cohort and 56% greater return to shareholders. That's the kind of data that I think is pretty tough to ignore, right? But before we get to solutions and how exactly these companies are doing it, let's take a moment to consider why so many companies are missing the mark, even those newer disruptive companies that we sort of think of as best in class in this space. I'm going to quickly go through my observations on where some companies are missing the mark. After that, we're going to talk a little bit about some tactics you can bring into your own organization to improve. And last, we'll talk about some companies that are getting it right. So first, I tend to see 4 core cultural or structural items that function as the key obstacles to building and sustaining great user experience. The first, lack of interest from leadership. Now, this one is sort of simple, so I won't go into too much depth, but in short, senior leaders often are not focused enough on building out or designing an organization that is capable of sustaining a great customer experience. And believe me, I'm not saying that leaders don't care about a fast mobile site or making their customers happy, just that they're not articulating a clear vision around these points, or recruiting the right talent, or building the processes and structures necessary to create this outcome. Now, many of us in this room are not running large organizations, so you may not think this is applicable. But there are things that you can do to fill these gaps within your own smaller organizations, and we're going to talk more about that as we go. The second big issue I tend to see is organizational silos, and what kind of presenter would I be if I did not illustrate this point by showing you a picture of a silo. The thing is, though, we see this all the time, not just silos in presentations, but actual silos in the organizations we work with. I recently worked with a company that produces multiple apps, but the product owners and developers for one app don't really engage much with the product owners, developers from the other app. I've seen companies that have these great design, engineering, and product teams that oversee the product detail pages, and then similarly great design, engineering, and product teams that oversee the checkout pages. And these two teams that manage the bookends of a typical customer journey never really work with one another. Now, there are good reasons that companies were built in this way. Unfortunately, though, there are not very good reasons that walls exist between teams that should at least be sharing information, if not collaborating closely to the benefit of their end customer, so that they can create that one consistent brand experience across channels. One of the most decorated military veterans in recent history is a man named General Stanley McChrystal. And after he retired from the military, he's written a number of books. None of them talk about user experience. They do dwell pretty heavily, though, on leadership and organizational design, because to defend your country, to run a military organization, you need to have a pretty well-oiled machine. One of the books is called Team of Teams, and in it, McChrystal talks about his time leading special forces in Iraq. And at a certain point, he notices something. He says, in conventional terms of strategy and tactics, his teams were winning nearly every battle, but somehow we were still losing the war. So he studied why. He realized that at times commandos would come back from the field with valuable intelligence, give some information that an analyst should see, but by the time they saw it 3 weeks later, that information was stale. He noticed that there were times an analyst would come up with a target that they needed to hit. But by the time that information went up the chain of command and back down to the troops on the field, terrorists were long gone. As the management writer Greg Satel observed, in short, the connections between McChrystal's teams were broken. So McChrystal pivoted. He tried to change his team from being these sort of set chess pieces on a board to an interconnected network reflecting the complexity of the battlefield. He fostered a feeling of shared purpose, and I think really critically, a feeling of shared consciousness. And that, Satel says, is how he became a revered leader in our nation. Now, there's some great lessons here. And I think what's true about silos in the US military and what we can learn from that is more than applicable for the complex world of omni-channel retail or digital marketing and e-commerce. I would urge you to listen to those lessons. The third big area is inconsistent KPIs and incentives. Now, you'll hear me often say that strong organizational design is just as important to measurement strategy as it is to customer experience. And this is a critical theme because I think the two go hand in hand. Multiple speakers, including ones that have preceded me, will talk about the fact that you can't have a great customer experience without being really good at measurement and data. And so one of the downstream impacts of silos or poor internal communication tends to be inconsistent KPIs or incentives. And we see this too all the time. I recently was doing a UX audit for a company that we work with, and we realized that there was one team that touched the funnel that wanted to improve consideration among their customers. So they wanted scale. Another team touching the funnel wanted to improve conversion rate. So they wanted efficiency. And these are two really common goals. And if you think about them for a moment, you'll realize they're actually mathematically at odds. The idea of improving consideration and scale versus improving efficiency. Now, it's because they work on different components of the funnel and they have their own goals. But what UX changes you might make following an audit, and even what spending decisions the company might make, could be prioritized differently, depending on which of those, scale or efficiency, is more important. And you could see how this manifests itself when an organization builds that landing page for a new ad campaign. The product marketing team might say, we need a video to create an emotional connection between our customers and the new product. And the development team might say, that means the page is going to take too long of a time to load, and interactivity is going to suffer. Now, I don't know who should win that argument. It's not really clear. What I do know is it belies a different set of incentives for these two teams, different set of KPIs they want to optimize towards. And the problem with that is this creates lack of clarity, inefficiency, and sometimes at worst, even rivalry. The fourth big issue we tend to see is this stuff is just plain hard, and we should admit that. It's not that organizations and leaders make an active choice to ignore what's necessary to deliver a best-in-class user experience. I mean, at least most don't do that because everyone wants to deliver a great user experience, right? Ultimately, though, it is hard to build the structure, that collaborative spirit, the muscle memory, all those things necessary to create the outcome of great user experiences. And again, don't just take my word for it on this one. Let's look at one company that has really tried to think about this evolution, and let's consider their experience. That company is Footlocker. Our digital transformation efforts, said Pawan Verma, their CIO, were triggered once we realized that customers were at a level of digital sophistication where they stopped differentiating in-store experiences from the .com and vice versa. Overall, he says, our work has been centered on people, process, technology, and culture, four really critical items, and reshaping each of these in service of our customers. Now, according to CMO, this meant breaking silos throughout Footlocker so that departments like IT, merchandising, customer experience, ones you might not think would work together so well, were all on the same page and working toward a single goal. Believe it or not, Verma says, changing a technology or changing the paradigm around marketing, it's the much easier part of digital marketing and digital transformation. Culture change is much harder. And that's the strongest muscle we had to build. He's right. Big changes, and especially big changes in relation to culture, are nearly always hard. The data says it's worth it, though. So let's dive a bit deeper to better understand what the experts are saying are the most critical success factors for design-focused companies. Now, you'll remember earlier I mentioned this McKinsey study called The Business Value of Design. And remember, companies that embrace these principles that I'm about to share with you are more likely to generate shareholder value and faster revenue growth. And you can see the ideas that McKinsey surfaced correspond pretty closely to the 4 issues I just outlined. Now, we talked briefly about leadership commitment, and I'm going to close with 2 examples about why strong leadership is so important. You'll also note the role of really great leaders woven throughout some of the tactical recommendations I talk about. For the other 4 items, analytical leadership, silos, joint responsibility, and continuous iteration, I want to divide them into 2 groups that you'll see fit kind of neatly together. First, let's discuss analytical leadership and continuous iteration. McKinsey found that the best companies have a rigorous testing culture. They try things out frequently, they learn from their mistakes, they listen to their users. And you can see why then that analytical leadership becomes so critical. You can only be good at testing if you're good at measurement. But I think analytical leadership tends to go beyond that. It also means rigor. It means investing in platforms for shared insight. Take that app example I gave before of the company that produces multiple apps, but their product owners don't really engage with one another. You could say that's about silos, because kind of it is. But it's also about analytical leadership, because these apps did not share the same measurement platform. That limits those teams' ability to be rigorous around the entire portfolio, create that consistent brand experience, especially for customers that use multiple of the apps that they produce. Analytical leadership, I think, means being able to derive insights about the entire customer journey in a way that is agnostic about where it begins and ends. Teams need to be able to have data that they can share with one another. Now, this last point is sometimes called democratizing data, and it's a point that came up in a study that Deloitte conducted with Google on digital transformation in the retail sector. Now, Deloitte interviewed a whole host of retailers, pure play and omni-channel, newer to the space, and old line companies, large, small, all over the globe. And they came up with a set of 5 principles. They're a little bit more tactical than what McKinsey talks about, but I think they help inform what best-in-class looks like and how to actually make this real. Now, I've already said you must understand customer data in order to deliver a great user experience, and fortunately, Deloitte agreed with us on this point. For them, analytical leadership meant experiment, experiment, experiment. Reward those that are curious, those that want to test and iterate, and aim to build the culture and technology platforms necessary to do it. Next, democratize your data. Again, you need a combination of the right culture and the right technology platforms to do this, but the key thing, I think, is no team should own data as a resource. It can't be a single team's province. Each team that makes decisions, basically everybody, should have access to the right data to share their insights and conclusions and be able to share that with other teams. Now, I want to return to McKinsey because this last point about democratizing data and being able to share it dovetails with a key principle of theirs. Whether it's speed, whether it's data, whether it's user-centric design, customer experience, all the things we're here to talk about, these need to be everyone's responsibility. Everyone. And silos, they do us no help in this regard. Tactically, Deloitte found 3 ways that the best retailers are aiming to limit silos and foster joint responsibility, and I think these are really important. 1, have a clear and well-communicated vision of why data or user experience is important. 2, leadership must set an example with decision-making that is informed by data and especially by user behavior. 3rd, and I really love this one, align incentives to intention, because the best retailers are building KPIs in a very considered fashion, and they're doing it as a way to inspire collaboration across departments. Again, you can see the role of strong leaders throughout these tactics, but it's not an idea that I think begins and ends with the C-suite or SVPs. I manage a team of only 4 people. I know I could be doing a better job with these principles and using them to create best-in-class practices just within my small organization and then beginning to align with the other groups at Google that we work with. Ultimately, Deloitte found, and this is kind of disappointing, the majority of retailers interviewed, they're able to diagnose issues in the user experience that cause customers to abandon, but few have built the organizational and technical agility to optimize the user experience based on customer behavior. In short, we need to get better. Here's one idea. I actually think it's fairly basic. And I'm not sure if BBVA Compass is here. I saw that they had signed up to join this event, so it's a good example from them. Rob Brown, the global CMO of BBVA Compass, talks about this. It's BBVA Compass is a bank, global bank. Forrester has awarded them Best Banking App 2 years in a row. So they're doing something right. He says, we will not start a project without the triangle in place. Triangle is design and data in one corner, the business owner needs to be there, and technology and engineering. And look, by not start a project, Brown means you're not going to get funding for your project unless these 3 groups are aligned on the outcomes they want to create. It's sort of a project-based and simple, elegant way, I think, to enforce the breakdown of silos. Now, Walmart is one of our clients that has learned the hard way about the need to embrace many of these concepts in order to improve customer experience and deliver business results for the company. I recently interviewed a technology VP at Walmart named Anand Contractor. She explained to me some of the keys to their digital transformation. She told me about the way various departments at this company of over 1 million people, think about that, over 1 million people needed to begin to move in lockstep, to share goals, regardless of whether they focus on the store or the digital site. She said it was a journey. About 10 months of a lot of hard work went into defining these things from a customer's angle and translating them into objectives. A lot of alignment was needed. Now we all understand how the customer funnel works, and we all have a similar set of high-level goals. I've taken a lot from my conversations with Anand, and while I haven't done an in-depth analysis of Walmart or spent days observing how the company operates, I don't work at McKinsey. 3 things stood out to me in speaking with her. The first is that leadership appointed a chief customer officer. This is someone whose job it is to align everyone around the customer journey. Second, executives gave many functional leads the authority to look after and improve both in-store and online journeys because everyone shared the goal of increasing gross merchandise value. They share a KPI, and ironically, I think it's a KPI that helps solve for that scale versus efficiency problem I talked about before. 3, all who play a role in a product release have a monthly review. They bring analytical rigor to these reviews, they share incentives, and by having them, they reduce the impact of silos. Now, Walmart has this challenge of massive scale. And it may not be a challenge that we all can relate to. I mean, a lot of us do work at large companies, and even if we do, we probably work in a small division or on a single product. We're not facing the same challenges as this massive retailer as Walmart does. And so I want to bring us back to where we started, a more intimate environment. Think back to the restaurant we started with. Now, if you owned this restaurant and you found out that the person at the host station was routinely greeting people with critiques of what they were wearing or their haircut, you'd fire the person, right? I mean, like this, at the very least, you'd have a really difficult conversation with them about the type of experience you're trying to have at this restaurant. It wouldn't be that hard, would it? See, the thing is, I think that's an oversimplification in reality. And I want to use a real-world example to prove the point. For me, Danny Meyer's Union Square Hospitality Group here in New York is the best one. Now, I'm a big food guy. That's the reason that I'm started the talk with a restaurant example and why I'm closing with one of the people I think is the best restaurateurs in the world these days. Meyer's the founder of Shake Shack, which many of you probably have heard of. But before that, he built a reputation in the industry not just for producing great restaurants, but also, and more importantly to our conversation, for his unyielding focus on what he calls enlightened hospitality, which started at his first restaurant, and some still say it's his best, Union Square Cafe. Hospitality is not our end goal, Meyer says. Being essential is. If one of our restaurants closes, I want people to say, something just went missing in my life. Now, to be fair, I have no idea what metric you use for that. What I do know, I read this once, is that one of his restaurants closed for an unpublicized renovation, and a makeshift memorial went up among loyal customers, expressing these heartfelt condolences about how much they'd missed the place. Now, that kind of thing, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens because everyone shares that goal of being essential, from the server to the line cook to the sommelier to that host, and especially the hiring team, because this is about a culture that Meyer has worked to cultivate for many, many years, an effort from top to bottom and everywhere in between to ensure the customer always leaves happy. He says, I guarantee you, the decision to return has almost everything to do with how did we make you feel. That's the challenge Disney faced, right? I think it's actually the challenge we all face. It makes us common here. And what I love about Danny Meyer is that he has spent decades aiming to perfect an organizational design, a set of processes, a culture, for the purpose of making the customer happy, to get them to come back. He knows it's not entirely about his food. It's never really just about the food, right? He knows, like I do, and I hope you all do too, in order to create and sustain great customer experiences, you must put in place the right culture, the right processes, and the right organizational design. Thank you, and I'll look forward to talking to you guys during the break.